teenager, I was probably having a fight with her. This is how I remember it. You know, we all reconstruct how things happen because they're so traumatic. But I remember we were having an argument, and she said, it seemed to me she was saying, I wish, you know, I had these other daughters and they're perfect. And I said, what? And she said she was married. She had been married before and left these other daughters behind. They were half-sisters. Then there were other secrets. One was that her mother had died, had been the first wife of a rich man after being a widow, and that she died accidentally. And then more came out that she wasn't the first wife. She was really the fourth wife, and that she killed herself. And it continued from there. I always think that we've run out of secrets, family secrets, but they just keep coming.
So why do you think the secrets were kept in the first place? Were they to shield pain?
Some of them were shameful. Some of the secrets involved being married. She was still married. She left behind daughters. That is something that people would not understand. It was shameful that her mother killed herself. So I can see that there was a reason to leave behind the things that were unflattering, would be misunderstood, but also had a lot to do with pain. I don't think she ever forgot, though. I think she kept that pain, and it grew worse because she couldn't talk about it. There was a lot of depression that she had, and it came out in different ways. And I only understood it later when I knew what these violent images were about in her warnings, why she talked about terrible men, why she was so convinced that I would come to some ruinous end.
Through a man?
Through a man, through not respecting myself. My mother was married when she was 18, in effect in an arranged marriage to a playboy. And she started having children, and he brought in other women into the house, into their bed, and expected her to simply take it. She tried to kill herself a number of times, tried to leave him. She was put in jail trying to leave him. So she had no rights to say, I don't want any more children. And because she tried to kill herself before, she assumed if I had a bad marriage, if I met a man who treated me poorly, I would have the same feelings.
When you were 15, your father and your older brother died of brain tumours. I believe
Yes.
it was within 6 months of each other.
Yes.
What was your reaction to that? How did that affect you?
In the beginning, I went along with what my father and mother believed, and that was that a miracle would happen with my brother. That my father was very religious, and he recruited the people of the church to pray for the miracle, and I was told that if I had enough faith that it would happen. And then when my father became ill, I was told it was another test of God to strengthen us even more. And then my brother died, and my mother went a little crazy. And she tried to find all kinds of reasons why it happened, and that maybe it was a curse, or if she did this and that. I started getting scared because she was out of control. And then my father died. And I stopped believing everything, everybody. I rejected religion, I rejected Chinese beliefs, and as a writer, this was a good thing. It was a terrible thing back then, but as a writer, you have to ask your own questions and discover what you truly believe and how things work. That's what you're writing about, a story, and you're saying how things work.
But personally, to say that you rejected everything, how did you process these two close people to you being taken away?
I was a daddy's girl. I've never been able to write about him in a story, male character, because he's too perfect in memory. And obviously he wasn't perfect. No one is perfect. And I looked up to my big brother, whereas my little brother and I didn't get along that well. My big brother, if he ran for an office in high school, I wanted to do the same. If he read a certain book, The Loved One, Evelyn Waugh, I wanted to read the same book. So I felt abandoned, and I actually felt angry toward my father for leaving me with my mother, who was crazy. I became a cynical child at the age of 16, an angry girl. Back then, there were no psychologists who came and said, you just lost the two people closest to you, and you must be feeling sad or angry. I was expected to become a better daughter instead.
Your mother took you and your other brother off to Switzerland.
Yeah.
Was that an escape from the cancer that had befallen your father and other brother?
My mother took us to Europe for two reasons. One is that she thought we were all going to die, that there was a curse, and that we should see the world before that happened. We'd never had a true vacation or traveled outside of California. And the other was that if the reason was some kind of disease or something having to do with where we were living, that we could escape that and perhaps escape the force that had caused the illness. But my brother and I lived with the idea that we might possibly die at any moment. If we had a headache, my mother took us down to have an EEG done of our brains. So it was rather frightening, and also made us band together in a very unusual way. I think in the way that you have these religious groups that band together and do crazy things that, kill each other en masse. And that was the way we were, in a way. We had had such trauma that we felt apart from the world.
Do you still feel that way? Do you think that you're going to die at any moment?
No, I don't. I mean, I know I'm going to die one day like anybody else, and I think what it's made me more aware of, I can accept that. People don't want to talk about it. I can accept the fact that I'm going to get old and be glad about that and prepare for it. I am aware of danger, and my way of dealing with it, instead of my mother thinking about it and obsessing, is to prepare. How can I be safer? How can I survive an earthquake? People say that's being paranoid, and I just think, no, I'm being wise. It's going to happen. The earthquake is going to happen sometime in the next 50 years, and I'm prepared.
I'd like to hear about your first trip back to China and what your impressions of China were.
I had an impression of China that was like a stereotype. When I was growing up, I was completely American. I wasn't Chinese. I wanted to reject China. China to me was people working in a rice field wearing those conical hats. And when I went to China, it was 1987, and it was after the Cultural Revolution, but everything was still very conservative. I stood out completely because I had long hair and makeup and everything. And over the years, things changed. China changed, and I became less noticeable. But I had, as my perception of China was evolving, I suddenly had a throwback to my old stereotypical impression. I was talking to my sister about going to a poor village to see some rice farmers in Guizhou, poorest province in China. And she was in Shanghai. I was staying with her, and she said, "What's so special about that? I did that for 19 years. And I said, "What?" She was sent down during the Cultural Revolution, and that was her life, wearing the conical hat, being in the rice field, cutting net, pulling leeches off her legs. And so here, when I was a young girl, thinking, that's the China I don't want, that was the China that my family had.
So that was your half-sister who'd grown up in China the whole time.
Yes.
Was that mind-blowing to you that that could have been you?
Always. When I thought of that, and it threatened me when my mother first said that I could have been that girl, and even though I wasn't, that the idea I could have suddenly been cast into that. I did think over the years also, how is it that I became who I am? What if I had been living in China? How would I be different? And so I wanted to find that out with my sister, and she said she had wanted to be creative as well, to write or to be an actor, and she had to stop thinking that way, that it was impossible. And she said over the years her imagination rusted and she wasn't able to think that way. But I disagree. she is very creative and she's very persistent, and she can think of a way to make something that seems impossible happen. And to me, that is creativity. She can solve something. So that made me think there is something basically within both of us, whether it was given to us by our mother or whether we were born with it, that is some essence of our personality.
That first trip to China was in 1987. 1989 was the Tiananmen Square massacre. I think that was also the year that the Joy Luck Club was published. So was the trip to China a distinct catalyst to the production, the writing of the Joy Luck Club?
It was. I had written 3 stories before I went to China, and I had a scare that my mother had died, and I found out she hadn't had this heart attack when I went back, and I promised I'd go to China. When I went there, it was with the idea that I would see the China that had shaped her and who she was, and to understand her better. And that then made me realize how American I was. Not how Chinese I was, but how American. And I started making these observations that became the stories. I mapped them out when I got back. And that's when I started in earnest, a story about a girl who goes to China for the first time to know her mother.
You lost your own mother of Alzheimer's disease in 1999. Given that you often write about mothers and daughters, how have you come to terms with her death? I know it was some time ago, but I haven't heard you talk about that.
My mother, I realized, had been my greatest protector. And even though I had prepared for her death for 4.5 years, when she actually died, and even though she was helpless at the end, I felt as though this aura of protection had suddenly disappeared, just like that. I, though, still felt that she was around me, and I feel very lucky because she's with me all the time. I was very sad at first, and I said, well, she'll never be a part of my books. And I heard her say, but I can be the dead tour guide. And I was writing a book about people going to Burma. I can be the tour guide, I can be dead. And I thought, you're right. And so I have a dead tour guide. And it's her voice, exactly. So I can get her voice almost at any time at will. She's there. Whether she's there because of my knowledge of her in my head or my heart, or whether she's actually there in my room telling me what to say.
You've lived a life where so many things have happened to you and to the close people around you. I think you've been mugged, you've been nearly raped, you've seen a lot of stuff, shall we say. How do you observe this without absorbing?
Some people have said, oh, you're so unlucky. You were almost in a mudslide. You almost drowned. You almost did this. And I said, no, that means I'm lucky. I've been tested 20 times and I came out alive. That means I'm lucky. And that each time recently, in the recent past, when terrible things have happened, it meant that I truly was prepared, that all this was good. It made me strong, that I wasn't undone by it. One of the things that happened was 9/11, and I was there in a newsroom, actually, but on the way back, seeing the tower fall, being trapped in New York and Soho. And I wasn't scared. I realized the most important thing was to be with my husband and my dogs and to simply be prepared. So I thought, this is good. I have an attitude about my life and what's important, and not being fearful of the death, but knowing that this can happen,
You got Lyme disease, which wasn't diagnosed till 2003. I read that it was from being bitten by a tick.
Yes.
How did that affect you? And also, how, again, do you stay resilient, given that, your health has taken quite a strong blow?
It was 4.5 years before I was diagnosed, and during that time, Lyme disease had gone into my brain, and it had left little lesions in there which caused epilepsy. The worst part of it aside from the constant fatigue and headache and joint pain and everything else, was the inability to think. And I truly believed at one point that I had Alzheimer's. When you can't remember which pedal to push in your car when you see a red light or a green light, that's bad. When you can't remember how to get home, that's bad. When you can't remember what you've just read, when you turn the page, what was on the previous page, you think you're going insane. I couldn't write. And I thought to myself, what of myself is left? If I can't think, if I can't can't talk to people. I was able to finally get diagnosed and get on medication, and slowly recovered. When I finally could think, I wrote 20 pages a day because I was afraid my brain would shut down again. I am now healthy. I'm not cured, but I'm healthy. I manage my health. I can do everything I want except for drive, and I never like to drive. So that's a bonus. I have a good chauffeur. He's my husband. And I think to myself, well, at my age, almost everyone I know has some kind of health condition, some kind of health problem, and I'm doing a lot better than many of them.
You sometimes perform in a band called the Rock Bottom Remainders, and I believe Stephen King is also in that band.
Yeah.
He wrote a dedication to you in a book that he wrote about the craft of writing called On Writing.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from your perspective. A lot of people struggle with the difference between telling a story and showing what the story is. It's the difference really between connection with the audience and losing them. Do you have a view on the specifics of the craft of writing that make writing come alive?
I often have people say, I have a good story, I need some help just in editing. And I say, have you ever been to a writer's workshop? No. And I said, it really is an art, but it also has to do with whether you are a writer. Writer, to me, the writing that I like to read has a voice, a very distinctive voice. By that I don't mean vernacular or dialect or a style that's southern or northern. It has to do with having a certain intelligence, a knowledge and a history, that the way you are telling a story has to do with that. You are the guide to that universe. You have to be trustworthy. And so you could have a story told by two different people, and your approach to telling this story encompasses your understanding of what happens in the world and why, and who you are and how you affect that world and what you observe.
Having discussed the whole idea of voice, do you see yourself ever moving away from the subject matter and the kind of characters that you write about?
I hope that I evolve as a writer. You're always afraid you're going to repeat yourself. And at the same time, I've looked at other writers' work, and I realize that they do write about similar themes, so to speak, and it's because we are the people we are. We have certain obsessions in life, and we are going to return to those. Whether we write about family and disconnection, and whether or not forgiveness is possible, or what is the limit of love, we will continue to write those stories, and from perhaps a changing perspective that is larger or smaller, more inclusive, more exclusive. I always hope that I'm going to be more open and find more possibilities in human nature. But I also find as I get older that the romance of who we can be is no longer there.
What do you mean by that?
The romance of, for example, the limitless love, or the need to forgive no matter what, that forgiveness makes us a better person. I feel that when I've looked at things, I think love is the most powerful force that's out there, but love is not limitless. It's a romance that maybe with parents, that's the only exception. Parents have unlimited love, or maybe not, as in the case with my mother. I say to myself, how can I reconcile this? I don't want to become a cynical person. What is the difference between truth and reality and hope and wishful thinking when we look at human nature?
So your recent book, The Valley of Amazement, what is it that you're trying to say about human nature in that book?
That book is a lot about identity and who we are based on everything that's happened to us by accident, by history, by choice, by bad choice, by mothers. And we end up thinking what is in us that's resilient and will always be there. What don't we like in ourselves? So it's a quality about our own humanness that determines how we look at human nature and how we deal with people. There is also the question of love and mother. You know, what kind of love should a mother provide? What kind of protection? And if you lose that, if your mother violates what the condition of love is, can you ever forgive that mother? Now, my mother left behind 3 daughters. Is that forgivable? If she left because she was in love, is that forgivable? She left, she had an abusive husband who would not divorce her, then is that understandable? If she had left and the communists took over the country and she was not able to come back, is that forgivable? Is that understandable? And so you go through the permutations of your own sense of what you need and who you are, and you look at another person through those eyes.
Have you forgiven your mother?
My mother, there were moments that I thought I'd never forgive her as a child, but she never betrayed me, you know. And so part of it is learning about forgiveness, what needs to be forgiven and what was simply normal. We are wounded by people. My mother once, close to the time she died, she had a moment of clarity. She'd been nonverbal. It was like she came up from the depths of the ocean and she said to me, "I'm scared. I don't know who I am or where I am." And I said, "No, we all have that." She said, No. I remember also I did something terrible to you. I hurt you when you were a child." And I said, "No, you didn't." She said, "I did." And she said, "But I can't remember what." And then she said, "I hope you forget just as I've forgotten." And I thought, oh my God, this is what every child wants to hear.
Did you reject the idea of being a mother?
I didn't reject it, but I was fearful that I would be like my mother in being overprotective. I'm sorry,
I'm sorry too.
No. I mean, it's a good moment. I mean, the tears are like, oh my God, she was so wise to be able to give me this gift at the end, but it's sort of like saying, please forgive me. And by that time in my life, I didn't really need to forgive anything because I understood what she had done. I always tell people that had I become a mother, I would have been just as worried and protective as she was, and my child would have hated me. My husband and I would look at children who were horrible. You know, maybe they were screaming all the time or telling their parents they hated them, or teenagers and they wrecked the car, they, lied. And I said, that's who our kids would have been. But then we see the kids of our friends, and my nieces, and they turned out beautifully. And they're so lovely, and I just think that could have been our kid too. But ultimately, I don't have any regrets. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to do certain things in my life. And now I'm bribing my nieces. I'm doing as much as I can so that when I'm old, they will come by and visit me and do all the things. And they are lovely, and they do love me, and we do things together.
You have been incredibly generous. Amy Tan, it's been a pleasure having you on 1+1.
Thank you.